Hello and welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Life podcast, episode number 119. Here we are today, and last podcast, we started talking from our manual, which we wrote several years ago, going over some basics for caregivers. The qualities of a caregiver, an empathic, caring individual, the stresses that they're under caring for either someone they love or a client, and the causes, the symptoms that can be leading up to burnout. And near the end of our last podcast, 118, we started talking about energy, both the energy that a caregiver gives and the energy that they can receive back, and that this becomes an exchange. And I have a feeling that this is an idea that not too many people are familiar with. And it's so important for caregivers to be aware of this, because it leads directly, if they're not aware of it, to compassion fatigue and burnout that we discussed last time. So Peter and I wanted to take a little more time today to go over this so that it's understandable. We don't want to be talking clinical talk. We want to be talking something that people can understand.
We have been clinicians a long time.
Yes, we cop to that.
Okay. And that's our language, but that's not everybody else's.
No, and your point has always been, as long as I've known you, that you have to get it down to earth. If people can't understand what you're saying, there's no point in saying it.
And applying it too, so they can apply it. What good is it? It makes us look smart, and what good is it if we don't help others? But I'm glad you're talking about it, because going back to our manual that we wrote and used for training, it's training me all over. Every time I look at it, it fascinates me and draws me in again. Because a lot of the things that we have now applied specifically to caregivers, frontline workers, because that's who we identify with. That's where our passion has become stronger and stronger, and that's who we are. We're not just clinicians anymore. We're caregivers just like any other person on the front lines. We've been dealing with death and dying and sickness, and the families that are helping those that have been that are sick, and especially this last couple of years with COVID-19. But we've dealt with veterans and what their families go through, taking care of them, and not always just physical, but folks that are having to live with vets that come back with serious PTSD, and it's rough to live with a person that has post-traumatic stress.
It is.
It is rough, and they make life very hard and difficult and confusing for a lot of people who love them.
They do without meaning to.
No.
It's just a fact.
But they can do some damage.
Yeah.
And our heart has been with them, and it still is. But now that we're involved with the caregiving world, we're dealing with all kinds of caregivers. We put together teams, our own as well as for other families and loved ones, and it's growing exponentially. The need is growing. So I go back to our old clinical understanding of how we learn to preserve ourselves in our work, and what we had to become aware of and what we had to learn so we could be in this for the long haul. This is my 52nd year doing this, and I'll be honest with you, I'm as motivated, maybe more so today than I ever was, because it feels so much more applicable to down-to-earth real needs. And I'm excited about it. I'm touched by it deeply, the pain and the struggles and the suffering. It touches me deeply, believe me, and I have my own. So these podcasts now have something very special to them. They're not just geared toward clinicians. They're geared toward civilians, pedestrians, all of those that are facing very, very difficult relationships and situations that they have to give of themselves in ways that they never expected to have to do. And it's happening. Our latest statistics, there's 42 million unpaid caregivers, and it's growing exponentially. So we're talking about something that's enormous. We're seeing how people are being changed and families have been changed just with this COVID-19 dramatic epidemic. It's touched us. And we feel the pain. But I'll tell you what we also feel. That we have skills and we have understandings and empathy because of what we go through too, that we can help others. And that's why we reach out through the podcast now. We want to reach a lot more people and help them. And that's what it was. Lynn's legacy, my wife's legacy before she passed. We're learning so much, And it was changing our intellect to something of the heart that was so much more profound and deep than I ever could have imagined, no matter how much trauma I've ever dealt with. Losing someone who I have loved and adored for 47 years. I still love her. Her picture's over there. And I carry her deeply within my heart. And so do a lot of people in our town, not just at our institute. She was a beloved, inspiring, lovely woman. But anyway...
yeah, I know that energy has been part of your training, part of your practice, part of your work, really from the beginning. And that was almost like one of the real kind of somewhat unique or different approaches that you sought out in the beginning of recognizing the energy exchange in the body in terms of emotional health.
Absolutely, and being a person that's more physical, not just intellectual, I would feel it. And I was drawn to changing my PhD once I realized that my clinical studies were not going to include much about the body, and I realized that's not going to work for me. And it's not really working for a lot of people that I see doing this. So I changed my PhD to something that would involve a lot more understanding about how the body's involved and how it takes on pain and how it holds it and how it creates contaminations in our behaviors and our lives. But now...
And by pain, you're not talking about an injury to the body. You're talking about emotional pain.
That can lead to physical... Here's the thing. What we've learned about our beloved caregivers, especially our hospice brothers and sisters. I just talked to some people in Florida today that are involved in hospice. One of our favorite, she was on one of our podcasts.
Oh, Tamar?
Tamar. She got hurt. She was wearing down. I could see it. A gifted woman. And she hasn't been... I haven't been able to reach her. People haven't been able to talk. She hurt her back. She went into surgery. She hasn't worked with them in, God, it's got to be 2.5 months.
Oh, man.
And we love her.
Yeah.
She's a very special woman. Yeah. And how many other very gifted hospice workers that we know?
We know many who've retired, and it's hard to tell sometimes what was motivating them to retire, and it could be just this.
The exhaustion and their physical, it turns into a burnout, and their bodies break down. So we know that what we're talking about is for real. And we have a way of preventing this from happening. We want to get it out there. We can do the work here at the Institute, but we want more people to become aware of what's happening to their bodies in their work. That means they've got to begin to tune in to their own bodies. They've got to know themselves. They've got to, it's funny, in this work as a caregiver, it really forces us to look at ourselves, whether we like it or not, because it's so profoundly involving.
Challenging, yes.
And challenging, that we wind up coming up against our own mental illnesses, maybe not an illness, but mental damage, psychic damage, trauma in our own lives, things that we had to do to survive ourselves, and what we did to adapt to survive, and the toll that it's taken, and we weren't even aware of it anymore. It was so buried in our unconscious, in our bodies, we weren't even aware of it. Go become a caregiver and see how long it stays buried. It draws out like an old wound that's been festering. It draws it to the surface. We're dealing with Jenny's husband, who's becoming more involved with the caregiving. It's new for him. Sure enough, it's coming up for him, and it would. We know about it because we've been doing it for years. He hasn't. Here it is, and it's inescapable.
And would you say that these emotions, these things we've buried and haven't come out, is this energy? Is there an energy part to that?
There's a trapped energy. In other words, normally energy in our life, if we're in a normal self-regulated state, comes through us and moves through us and out, But when you've been traumatized yourself, or you have pain in your own life, and you've had to protect yourself, your body will automatically begin to create armoring, protection, and it pushes down these old things that have happened to you, the energy, the trauma, whatever. It's in your body. God bless you, Steve. Our producer sneezing. As they say in Yiddish, he's sneezing on the truth. She's not Jewish, but you'd think she was. She talks more Yiddish than I do.
Oy vey.
That's what happens when you talk to my mother too much.
Yes.
But anyway.
So we were talking about how these pushed down things is a restriction of energy.
Absolutely, and then it doesn't flow anymore. It's buried deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
Let's say someone had to adapt because as a kid they were being treated in ways that were abusive, or their love was being used in a way to manipulate them rather than love and nurture a child the way it should be. And the child builds these pains within themselves. And what they do is they know if they express it, they're going to get clobbered.
They'll be in trouble.
So they begin to bury it. And it doesn't mean they aren't mad about it. It doesn't mean they don't resent it. It doesn't mean they don't feel the pain of it, but they know they can't express it. So it gets, the energy, the experience gets pushed down inside them to a point where they don't even remember anymore, but their bodies do. Mm-hmm. And they begin to have contaminated reactions in their life. So they don't just focus their behaviors in the present. The past is involved too. What happens though later in life, a lot of those buried emotions begin under certain circumstances to trigger off and begin to be brought up to the surface. And it's amazing how powerful those things are.
They're powerful. What is why do you not want to have all these things buried? And what happens when this energy gets stimulated and it starts to come out? What is that a problem? What happens?
It is a problem, and I for one thing, it's when you're a caregiver, we are dealing with pain. We are dealing with current difficulties, devastating difficulties, and what happens is it will stimulate pain. Not just that we're dealing with pain in the present; it begins to challenge our old pain up to the surface. So we begin to overreact, or we begin to try to deaden it, or things begin to get distorted. And the pain that we had in the past, as well as the pain of the work we're doing now, gets to be unbearable. And what do people begin to do? It's very common in the world of caregiving. They begin to self-medicate. They begin to drink. They begin to do drugs. They begin to do a lot of things to try to quell the pain that's coming up instead of doing what we tell them and what we do, and that is get some help with it, deal with it. That's what we deal with at the Institute, and we clean out the old wounds. Mm-hmm. So the difference is they can deal with the pain in the present, which we have to as caregivers, but our own stuff isn't going to contaminate. If it gets triggered, and it can, we know that we later on we can we'll talk about this in the next episode, push the pause button. Mm-hmm. And I do it all the time, and so do you, where we know from our own bodies and our own energy, and we're aware that we've been triggered. And our pain is familiar to us. The constrictions in our body, the sensations that go with it, we're aware of it. We know we can't hemorrhage it into the work we're doing.
But isn't that also, I know you talked about people who might self-medicate, drink, or whatever to keep a lid on those painful emotions, but isn't it also true that people who do that have those things come up, they might just put them right out on somebody? They might be impatient with the person they're caring for.
Or worse.
They might, and then they go, "Oh, I didn't want to do that. What happened?"
And how much time we have been called in as consultants for bad situations with caregivers who burn out or are on the way to burnout, and the person they're taking care of and the family is desperate and they're terrified to lose the help of the caregiver, and yet the caregiver is beginning to lose it. So they'll either neglect the needs of the person they're taking care of, and the person's helpless. They'll overreact, and they'll get irritable, or they'll get abusive. They may regret it later and apologize, but they keep doing it enough. The caregivers get to a point where they can't. The caregiver can't stand it. The patient can't stand it. The client, the person, the family, and it's a disaster. We've seen them where the caregivers will be drinking all day. We were called in on one of those, and it wasn't that he started that way 2 or 3 years before, but he, over a 24/7 kind of involvement with a very debilitated individual.
It was a tough job.
Yeah, and he couldn't take it anymore.
No.
So his pain came out, but he didn't know what to do with it. So he drank a lot, and then he began to neglect the care of someone who needed him desperately, and leave the guy. I don't even want to describe how neglected he was. And when we saw it, we went, get rid of him. We didn't have time to be empathetic. We said, get him out of here quickly. We got to find somebody appropriate right away. The person that was being cared for was terrified.
Yeah,
because he had depended on this individual. Mm-hmm. He would almost rather accept the abuse rather than not have any help at all. Mm-hmm. Of course, we took care of that, and we made sure that didn't happen. But what we've learned is being a caregiver, being a first responder, firefighter, cop, Nurses, who are really taking heavy hits to these, and doctors, really are burning out at a rate that is I've never seen before. And so they don't want to work anymore. They don't want to be part of it. Or they try to kill themselves or something terrible because they're old. They don't know how to deal with that old pain in these very devastating.
Along with the new, fresh, in the present
Exactly.
stress and pain that they're taking
And
on
so they become either destructive to the patient or to themselves.
to themselves.
And we're seeing that. I would say it's an epidemic because I know hospitals can't even fill the needs that they have for their nurses.
That's what we've been reading.
And I've read that they offer these nurses like a lot of money. You know what my daughter-in-law said? Fine, but I don't want it.
Not for
And she
me.
doesn't want to do it anymore. And she was a very committed nurse.
She's not alone. From what
Yeah,
I've heard.
and she's not the only one.
Yeah.
So we've seen it a lot. We're seeing so many aberrations of people who come in with good intentions. They mean well. They really can be helpful for a while until their old energy, their old traumas, their old restrictions that have been pushed down begin to get stimulated too much, and they don't know how to handle it. So what happens is they get destructive. It begins to contaminate their behaviors.
The other thing we always say too, and we're not at the end, but we're getting a little close, is that even though these released old emotions along with the current emotional pain that comes in, even though it can become a real problem, we also always stress that it can become an opportunity.
The caregivers that are committed to growing and healing themselves, this is the truth, they seem to benefit by learning about themselves, by going through this, and then take corrective action for themselves. And they develop a resilience in the face of incredible trauma. I've been one of them. And
So have I.
And so have you.
Yeah.
Now, how many people have we trained that stay at my side with the work? None. This is the one. And if you want to see a woman who has courage, and when I say woman, I mean she makes the men and women who really have fallen away looks like, wimps. She has hung in there, but she had to go through an awful lot. Working with me anyway is hard, but it's also she's willing to face herself and is committed to growing and healing and improving and becoming the woman she's meant to be. And I will attest, it has worked. When we see one of her old ways, it doesn't fit anymore, and we look at it and go, for somebody else, but my God, this doesn't fit you. You're so different than that. Because she has grown so much and is such an incredible caregiver and overseer of what we do.
And that's what I wanted. I wanted the opportunity to work through old things and old pain, and also to make a difference in the present.
And you do. And you know what? The people that we want to help,
they can do that too.
They can do this too. Now here at the Institute and our work absolutely is one of the most effective ways I know of getting through this and becoming a Jenny or more, or me. But I'll tell you what, there needs to almost be a revolutionary change in the world of caregivers in order to do this. We don't fit the mold, but we know what to do. We've helped thousands and thousands of people. We know what we're doing. And you know what? We want to take it out of the clinical framework and bring it down to the civilian or pedestrian one and go, we can help you too, and you can benefit and grow and become the person you're meant to be in the face of tremendous difficulties and losses and trauma. We're not saying you won't feel the pain of the present. We're just saying the pain of your past won't contaminate and distort your behaviors and your actions and thoughts. You can correct it. If you don't, you're very limited on what you're going to be able to do. And frankly, we're seeing too many people go to the physical deterioration, and that really gets us. And then we're seeing it way too much for the people in the front lines. That this will become a physical deterioration, and sometimes we can't stop it. So we want to prevent that from happening. Anything that we can do, we're going to do. Any information that we can put together for you,
we're going
to continue to do this. And if you want to know more, get in touch with us. Get in touch with Jenny. We are committed and passionate about supporting caregivers of all kinds, helping the nurses, the doctors, firefighters, you name it, the cops. Just lately we're talking to some of the cops that are very good friends of ours. So, and certainly the military.
Yes.
And
yes.
we've dealt with Navy SEALs a lot, Marines primarily. But honestly, we wind up taking care of their families more than...
We do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we will come back to this.
Yep,
We'll
definitely.
be back to this.
There's
Thank
a lot
you.
here.
You bet. The Survivor's Guide to Life podcast is sponsored by Sonoma Coast Trauma Treatment, a 501c3 public charity. Their website is sctraumatreatment.org, where you can donate to help keep us on the air and on video. Our website is thesurvivorsguidetolife.com, where you'll see links to our YouTube channel and our different audio podcast outlets. You can contact Peter and I at Jenny at bernsteininstitute.com, 707-781-3335. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Please like and share, and also please join us again
And Spotify.
next time. And Spotify, yes, absolutely. Thank
Anyway, take care of yourselves. All our best here. Whatever we can do, we're here for you.